Well, hello there. How is everyone? I hope you are all well. You're looking amazing, by the way. You're looking absolutely amazing. How do you do it? I'm starting to get over the old man flu now too, which is also amazing. So with everybody being amazing, let's crack on and get into some meat and potatoes. As I'm talking about a question, this is more of a spitball, if you like. Bit of a spitball. And that is surrounding the Idaho 4 case and the FBI's presence. A lot of people have reached out to me over the last few days, what with this sort of new news that it's the FBI who have gone back into 1122 King Road, and it's the FBI specialists who have come in and they will be building this sort of virtual world, if you like, these models that are going to recreate the 1122 King Road property, so that when this does eventually go to trial sometime in 2029, we will, be able to allow the jury to virtually walk through this crime scene. Obviously, it would have been nice if they could have walked through the actual crime scene, like we see in other cases at times, but it would appear that people are hell-bent against allowing that to happen. The prosecution, probably, I don't really see why the prosecution would be so willing to allow this property to be knocked down, and it's quite odd that Ann Taylor agreed with it, don't you think? But they obviously want it knocked down, and it was put across that it was part of the healing process, which I'm not sure when the healing process for the university would trump justice in finding the killer and proving that this person murdered these four poor students. But I'm not a professional. I'm just this strange little weird guy on the internet who talks about true crime. So, look, I don't have any input. But the reality is, the FBI's presence around this case has led some people to really question why. At the end of the day, you could argue that this is a guy who, if Bryan Kohberger is indeed the person who did it, he's crossed state lines, which in theory would sort of mean that this falls into the realms of a federal crime. So, look, maybe that's how it's being treated, but it doesn't appear to be so. Now, later on down the line, should Bryan Kohberger get found not guilty, they could potentially revert to a federal crime situation, and this could be tried as a federal crime, and that probably wouldn't end well for Bryan Kohberger, as we know all too well that federal trials, 9 times out of 10 plus, they will get their conviction. But let's see how it goes. Let's see what happens, see what transpires. But at the end of the day, the FBI's presence around this crime seems to be a little bit, some may say, over the top. There was around 60 FBI agents involved in the investigation. I was actually reading a news article as well, and it's interesting to go back to the start because there was some little things that I noted just didn't add up. Like they were reporting, for instance, I'll give you one, that they originally claimed that they believed that the murders happened between the hours of 3 and 4 a.m. And around the same, this exact article was the same article that brought up that they were interested in locating a white Hyundai Elantra that had been seen sort of in the vicinity of that property. And I wondered to myself, so was the white Hyundai Elantra originally seen around the area between the hours of 3 and 4? But then I realised I was dropping down into a rabbit hole, and I didn't want to do that. At the end of the day, there's a white Hyundai Elantra, and they believe it's Bryan Kohberger's. Who knows? And Taylor, on the other half, she turned around and said that Bryan Kohberger and his white Hyundai Elantra weren't in the area at the time of the crime. I always found that quite bizarre. Anyway, I digress. Back to the whole purpose of the video. So the FBI's involvement, was it simply that the FBI were doing training of some description, something in the area, and they just thought, oh, we're here? we're here, we might as well help. We'll give you a hand because we're nice like that. We like to help out these small sort of out-of-the-way police forces when they get murders on the hand. And then I think to myself, I've never ever been able to see another case where that has happened before. In fact, you could argue that if they've got the resources to do this kind of thing at the drop of the hat, then why is it that they don't? They seem to have FBI agents just sitting around doing nothing in their volumes of 10s, being 60 in this one. I'm sure I just said that. But the Idaho 4 case, what would lead, if this isn't being tried as kind of a federal crime, and this is just about the FBI getting involved, what could potentially make the FBI get involved? And why would they be so invested in getting this going in the direction that it seems to be going, and that is that Bryan Kohberger is going to be sent down the river? Now, look, what I will say is if in this court they 100% prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Bryan Kohberger is the man, then he's the man. I'm not a Bryan Kohberger supporter. I am just a justice supporter. I want the system to work and be shown that it works. I want to be presented with the evidence that proves beyond a reasonable doubt that the guy did it. What I don't want to see happen here, which I fear is what's going to happen, is that we are going to be given a show. This is going to be now all about the how can I say, they're going to turn it into some sort of circus show where you have this mock-up of this model and they talk about how this person went through the property and how they, how they did the crime and really play and pull on the heartstrings of the jury. We see it, and I know it's part of the sort of how it works, but you can't just take what you have, which is a little, and turn it into something bigger. Do you know what I mean? When you start adding your bits to it, you start making something that's really, really small and insignificant turn into something that's huge, and because you try and make it look huge, people start falling for it. The evidence that we've seen before us is circumstantial evidence, and we do know that people get tried and convicted on circumstantial evidence. And what we normally see when this happens is that the circumstantial evidence is elaborated upon. It's made a lot bigger than what it is. And in the Idaho 4 case, you could also... I'll give you a tip. I'll give you a clue. This is something that Get a Clue actually said. And this was regarding the time frame of when these murders took place. The time of this is so important because we've heard various variations of what happened. Originally, it was between 3 and 4. Then it was between 4 and 4:30. Then when you start digging really into the nitty-gritty of it, between the lines, and look at when the car was driving, when it was parked, when it was driving, we kind of narrowed it down to the crime actually took place sometime around sort of, if we said 4:10 and 4:20, and that's being generous because the car was driving off at 4:20, so you could even knock a couple of minutes off that and say you've got around 8 minutes to do this crime as a single person going into this property with no help, no support, not knowing what's going on in the property, not knowing who he's walking into, the altercations that seemingly was had, but it was all done, dusted, out the way, nothing dragged out of the house, no evidence found in the car, no evidence of a clean-up. So everything was taken into consideration, and it was done in 8 minutes. Now, are the prosecution and equally the defence going to talk about that? Are they going to dissect upon how difficult it would be to do that? Who knows? But what I'm saying is, all of the evidence that we have, it can be a play on words to make it seem so much worse than what it is in terms of what they've got as evidence. The knife sheath, for instance. We know that this knife sheath is an absolute bone of contention, but will they allow specialists to come in and talk about how easy it would be for DNA to appear on this knife sheath by other means? Will they talk about the fact that the DNA on that knife sheath would have had to have been put on that knife sheath before it entered into the property, not while it was in the property? So that knife sheath alone doesn't prove that Brian Kohberger was in the property. Now, equally, it doesn't mean that he wasn't in the property. What I'm saying is that piece of evidence can be pushed so hard to make it look like there is no way that Brian Kohberger's DNA could have been on that knife sheath without him being the perpetrator. Or they can be honest. And the prosecution are not going to be honest, I don't think. How hard is Ann Taylor going to fight for Brian Kohberger? But again, with the FBI being all over this, it does make you wonder as to what is going on. And I thought to myself, is the FBI being involved a clue to the motive or what was behind this crime? Because I think to myself, what would have had to have been in the background of this for the FBI to be involved? And there's only a handful of things that would indeed mean that the FBI would get involved. And again, we're back into the realms of narcotics. Was there something in the background regarding narcotics? Again, I go back to Steve Gonsalves and his comments surrounding some of the stuff that would come out and his verbiage when he was talking about it. That it would be gross. And I thought, what did he mean by that? Was Steve Gonsalves simply alluding to the injuries? But then I thought he can't be, because the families most likely know the information. They know some of that. We know some of the information. We know what Kathy Mabbutt had leaked to the Gonsalves family. And no doubt the families will have seen that. We certainly know Steve Gonsalves did. And the likelihood is at least Madison Mogen's family did. So what was Steve Gonsalves referring to when he said that things would come out that would be considered gross and that people perhaps would not be ready for? Were things going on in this property that people could consider as gross? We've got a house that had more rooms than people. We had a delay in when the crime happened and when law enforcement were called that almost points towards that something had to be removed from that property or things had to be got in order before law enforcement was called over. We've heard numerous different things being mentioned. The connection between Steve Gonsalves and Hex led people to believe that this was potentially a group that were involved in potential cybercrimes even. And certainly if there were cybercrimes going on, there would be a connection back to the FBI in terms of an investigation. But something happened in this house. And at the moment, there is no indication of motive. We've been pushed that there's a potential that Madison Mogen was the target and this was a lovesick, love-struck Brian Kohberger who had become infatuated with Maddie and it spiraled out of control. But I do not believe that is the case. And the reason I don't believe that is the case is something that I mentioned in a previous video. And that was the fact that this person seemingly entered this house with an intention to go to specific rooms. Not just go room to room to room to room. Like you would expect just a mass murderer who has gone into a house to cause absolute, utter devastation and just no, it didn't matter who it was. I would just go into every single room. This person went into this property and avoided specific rooms and went to specific rooms. Specific rooms where at least one of them had been previously looked at in terms of having the locks changed, for instance. And that could have been something completely and utterly innocent. But the FBI are involved. And why are the FBI so invested? Let me know down below what you think. Why are they so invested? Is it because there are some things in the background that links it to bigger pictures? Are we looking at something much bigger in here? And is the information that comes out later going to be a bigger web? And when we are presented with the motive, it's going to be clear who was involved, and there's shocks to be had. Catch you all in the next one.